Hello. This short slideshow is about thinking like a medieval person. Surely, if I am having you read medieval literature, it would be helpful for you to understand how medieval people thought, because otherwise their literature, frankly, might not make any sense to us. So, the first idea I'm going to submit to you is a fairly radical one. There were very many smart people who lived before the modern era. We had enormously educated people throughout the world during the pre-modern era. But picture for a moment the stupidest person you know in this time that you know personally. And I mean, not just the person who you think is not as good at you at math, but somebody who is so stupid that you would spell stupid in their case Stoopid. That kind of stupid. Um, I submit to you that that person that you personally know knows a lot more about certain kinds of things, however ill-informed he or she is, than the best educated, smartest person of the Middle Ages. Not because of a lack of initiative of that medieval person, but because we have so much access in our society thanks to science and shared information that the people who lived in other times simply did not have access to. So let's consider what that means. However intelligent or unintelligent you are, there are things that you personally know about that the smartest person in medieval Europe did not. First of all, you do not blame problems of weather on evil, wrathful demons or the wrath of God. You understand because you have access on your phone to a map that shows you a cloud pattern, a cold pressure front, a warm pressure front, telling you what the weather's going to be. Um, and let us admit that in our heart of hearts, there is part of us that understands this medieval problem. Anybody who is seeing the power of a very big storm understands how, without that information, and sometimes even with that information, the storm can seem daunting. Um, I'm from the Northeast. Uh, in New York City, we learn to live with muggers, but we don't know much about tornadoes. And even to this day, even though I am easily able to access Doppler 4000 and take a look at the weather patterns that would contribute to tornado weather, there is part of me that wants to crawl under my desk and scream, "Oh God, I'm really sorry I lied about the score I got on the video game, and this is why your finger is descending from heaven to crush us like bugs, and I am so very sorry, I repent." I am willing to assume that a finger from God is coming to crush us when I am able, as an educated woman, to understand that science has provided a different explanation that is entirely plausible, much more plausible than my lying about a video game score causing a tornado. But the medieval people of Europe did not know this. They could only blame weather on supernatural forces they could not see. And they even had an area of study that they thought was scientific called brontology, where people thought that the sound of thunder was the sound of God's voice talking to us, and certain very holy monks were able to tell us what God said in the thunder, like literally what words they heard in thunder. You also understand germs and viruses. My goodness, can you imagine how scary it would be if people were dying around you from a disease, because clearly before you can even have a vaccination against a disease, you have to understand what it would be that would cause the problem in the first place. We have diaries from the late Middle Ages during the era when the bubonic plague killed about a third of the human race. It was a horrible season in the 1300s where just an enormous number of people were wiped out. And people were so frightened. I think it would be frightening anyway to see people dying like that. But without a cause, people had hallucinations that they recorded if they survived the plague that were astonishing. For instance, in Sicily, multiple peoples reported seeing a giant black dog dressed like a bishop, carrying a sword and cutting people down. In Scandinavia, many communities believed in something called a plague maiden, who was a beautiful woman who had a long, bright colored orange scarf, who would wave the scarf in your window, and then you would die of the plague. She looked beautiful, but she was a demon. And there was even one village in Scandinavia where a man was purportedly waited for the plague maiden, knowing that this was going to happen, that she would come by his window and stick her scarf in his window. And heroically, according to the legend of this town, this man took a sword and cut off her hand, which contained the scarf, and therefore she could not spread the plague to his next door neighbor or anyone beyond that on his street. And people so firmly believed in this story that until the mid 1800s, the local church had over the altar a framed orange scarf that they believed to be the plague maiden scarf that this man had captured in this manner. You know about germs and viruses, and the stupidest person you imagined at least understands that people can catch a cold because of a virus or a germ, and they are unlikely to blame things on dogs dressed like bishops or plague maidens. You understand that technology is possible. If there was a new piece of technology that you saw, you would not assume that witches had caused it. Even something as simple as a modern day cigarette lighter would cause so much fear in medieval Europe that the possessor would surely be burned as a witch, and the people who saw it would run away terrified. I know this sounds so basic. It's not just that you know that the world is not flat, which was, of course, a medieval view, but you actually know how to travel beyond your most immediate regions. Imagine a world where there was truly no map. Truly no map. If you look at the medieval Mappamundi that are available to see at the Library of London, you will see, for instance, a world where, just as a 7-year-old, if you ask a 7-year-old to draw a picture of the world as he or she knows it, maybe put his favorite, his house in the middle, and then he'd also make a picture of Disneyland, which he visited, sort of toward the left and toward the right, his grandma's house, and there would be all these different places, but it would be focused on priority rather than geography. Well, Jerusalem is at the center of the world, according to some medieval maps. And the world is just a vague place that has extraordinary um, terrors hidden in it. Not just sea monsters as you fall off the edge of the earth, but any number of places where if you traveled too far south, it was supposed that people walked upside down. Things like this. People with two heads. Things like this. There are writings from the Middle Ages that describe alleged eyewitness accounts of these people. The solar system as seen from space is something that we take for granted. Um, we understand that there is a universe. We understand that while the earth revolves around the sun does not revolve around the earth. This was a cause for religious persecution on the behalf of the astronomers who asserted this originally. Childbirth was a great mystery to the medieval mind. Something so basic, let me tell you, there were distinct doubts that a woman could get pregnant from one sexual act with a man. It was thought that it required many acts to form a body. And it was also thought that a woman's body was somehow a manufactured defect version of a male body, that somehow things had gone wrong, and while the person was supposed to be a man, she turned out to be a woman. And there was no sense of precisely what happened in the development of a child. Um, Uh, so we understand the idea of an embryo in our era. We understand, if you've ever been to sex ed class, if you haven't, I hate to break it to you, but even one sexual act can cause pregnancy between a man and a woman. Just saying. But this would have been information that was unavailable with any certainty to a medieval person, however well educated, including the doctors. Imagine how terrifying it would be for women to deal with doctors with so little information. Um, we take it for granted that we could live stream, for instance, a protest that's happening on somebody's cell phone in a place like Tehran. We can see it happen. How many of you watched the royal wedding of Meghan Markle to Prince Harry? You saw it in real time or close to real time if you saw anything at all, a picture even. The newspapers had the picture within minutes of the wedding, and I, being the nerd that I am, watched the wedding ceremony in real time and enjoyed it very much. The idea that one could have this information is a modern idea, because the truth was that a whole city could be destroyed and no one would know about it for months. War could be declared and you might not know about it for a good year and a year, 2 year and a half. There were limited levels of communication throughout the world. And this resulted in things that the Bible called rumors of wars. Rumors might be all you had for a good long time, or indeed ever. If any of you have taken even a junior high school level science class, you understand scientific methodology better than the best educated person before the 15th century. You understand that, first of all, there ought to be a methodology, that you ought not just throw stuff against the wall and see what sticks, scientifically speaking, that you could conduct an experiment in controlled conditions, that you would observe and take notes and create a field of data that would allow you to measure things and determine the source of change if indeed you saw change. This was such a revolutionary idea when it started to happen in the Renaissance, and it was just starting to happen. Even the idea of something like a microscope. Did your high school have a microscope? Oh my goodness. What an amazing advantage that would have been to the scientists through the 1800s. They did not have anything quite so sophisticated as a good microscope. So I ask you, how do you think this made pre-modern Europeans see the world differently than we do today? Um, surely this must have influenced a large number of things. Living life must have felt different. They must have relied on different signs. They had some natural signs. They understood the repetition of seasons. They understood that winter is followed by spring, by summer, by autumn, and then winter again. They had a vague sense of a calendar, and they marked those changes with traditional festivals that helped them mark times that let them know it was time to harvest or it was time to plant. Um, but there are so many other things that would have made the world look different to them than to us. And how do things happen according to them? Well, there were forces at work that they couldn't understand, which meant that they had to blame them on something or someone. And why they happened would surely be different than a reading of Doppler 4000 to explain a storm, or reading of a lab test to determine why a person was sick. And one of the chief problems of any era, the most disturbing thing that seems profoundly unjust to all of us to this day, is the idea that bad things could happen to good people. We wrestle with this question in, and we don't have good answers for everything. We really don't. The randomness of accident disturbs us. Why was someone standing on that street corner when the bus hit him or her? This is the kind of question that haunts us. Even though we are able to understand things in a scientific manner, we still want better explanations for certain things. And I, as a Christian, when I get to heaven, my first question I think I will ask God when I see him is, why do babies get cancer? It seems so radically unfair that babies would get cancer. Why do bad things happen to good people? There's a The problem of theodicy is why people have bad things happen, rather, why bad things happen to good people. Here's a definition. Theodicy is a specific branch of theology and philosophy which attempts to solve the problem of evil. The problem that arises when trying to reconcile the observed existence of evil in a world where the assumption of the existence of a God who is fully good or benevolent and who is also all powerful and omnipotent. And atheodicy also refers to any attempted solution to this conundrum. None of us have perfect answers. Not one person on earth can tell you with any certainty the totality of why bad things happen to good people. And to some degree, most works of literature wrestle with this problem in one way or another. It's not a central theme of the works we are reading this semester, rather this summer session, but truly, this is a problem that we need to wrestle with. So here are some things that you can know with some certainty that medieval people would have taken into account when looking at existence. Events which today we attribute to scientific causes, provable by scientific inquiry, were acts without natural explanation. Some demon must have been causing them. Some angel must have saved them. Therefore, they turn to the supernatural. And even if we believe in God, they turn to the supernatural in ways that we do not tend to turn for explanation for everyday events. Let me give you an example from an Anglo-Saxon text. There was a saint who started a bunch of monasteries that still exist today, the Benedictine order, Saint Benedict. And what happened was there was a boulder that the monks at a Benedictine monastery wanted to move, a giant rock. So they tried to push as they might, and they simply couldn't push the boulder. But Benedict came by, their bishop, and he told them that he could see a demon sitting on the boulder. And somehow, because they knew about the demon, they reasoned that with a lever and fulcrum, they might be able to dislodge the boulder. And they were then able to move after St. Benedict prayed and possibly suggested, we don't know, the lever and fulcrum. The demon removed boulder was easy to move in this manner. Think about that for a minute. They blamed the demon and not some basic physics on their inability to move the rock. I think today we would be glad if somebody inspired by God, let's say, thought of a lever and fulcrum. No, it was the demon. It was all about the demon. And for all medieval people, life without our science and technology was often bitter, short, and terrifying. There were some people in the Middle Ages who lived to a ripe old age, great grandmothers, people who lived well into their 80s a few times. But the average life of the medieval peasant ended by age 35. Um, much of this was due to a high infant mortality rate and the accidents associated with farming without any, safety protection whatsoever. And absolutely not one single antibiotic for disease and infection. Um, these things would have been just terrifying. And yes, life might indeed be bitter. Um, and many cultures therefore imagined gods in the ancient world and in the early medieval world who were wrathful and merciless. So here's what the world looked like for pre-European, or sorry, pre-Christian Europeans. They were polytheistic. They believed that there was more than one god and that these gods often fought with each other, which would cause problems for people. The gods were willful and impetuous. They were not rule-giving gods. Christianity is a place where we have rules. For instance, the Ten Commandments. If you obey the rules that the God has set out in Christianity, in Judaism or Islam, good things happen to the person who does that. But if God, if the person disobeys the rules of God, bad things happen to him or her. Therefore, there is some sense of things we ought not do. Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not cover thy neighbor's wife. We understand that there are rules that the God has set up. And if bad things happen, they might be associated with killing, stealing, and lying and committing adultery. However, that was not the case with pagan European gods. They might do anything at any time just because they were in a bad mood. They had no rules. The rule was do what I say right now, but even then I might not like you because I have the right not to like you because I run everything. And generally, the gods saw the human race as plaything in most pagan traditions. And so with that, I ask you to consider the movies. There were many spin-offs of this movie, many sequels, Final Destination. If you have seen this film, you have understood a medieval idea, the Anglo-Saxon idea of weird, which I talked about in another video here. Final Destination, somebody is predicted to die, and these people try to outrun their fate, but everything they do leads them to die anyway. So let's take a look at how this compares with of Wyrd, Wyrd spelled W-Y-R-D. The gods determine one destiny. To think otherwise was impious. In other words, don't mock the gods. They're impetuous. They might get mad at you even worse if you decided they didn't decide your destiny. Free will was largely an illusion. The gods might hold a grudge against a mortal for something that his or her parent or grandparent did. All a person could do was accept his or her chosen fate. There's nothing to do but just accept it. This is not unlike the idea expressed in the Greek play Oedipus the King, where at the end Sophocles writes, "Count no man happy until he dies," which is hardly something you want to put on a Hallmark card for somebody's birthday. If the gods were angry at one person, they might hold a whole city or occasionally the whole world responsible. Um, if one person made the gods angry, everyone might pay a price. And furthermore, throughout the Middle Ages, even in the Christian era, Europeans abided in a world where they thought that supernatural figures interacted regularly with natural ones. This is a picture that you see here of a beautiful tapestry woven in the what's called the High Middle Ages, and is visible at the Cluny Museum in France, of the Lady with a Unicorn. And we see natural figures. She is in a fantastical landscape. There isn't a sense of perspective. We are most certainly in the Middle Ages. Art has not invented in medieval Europe a perspective. So we see a field of a variety of creatures in a meadow, and she's on some sort of carpet with a lady in waiting. And uh, on the left of the picture, we see a natural figure holding a post. That would be a lion. A lion would be possible to see in Europe. You may not know this, but lions were not numerous in forests in the Middle Ages, but they existed in European forests. They existed and were often spotted. So a lion could exist. But on the right, we see a unicorn. A unicorn, first of all, never existed, let's be clear. And second of all, a unicorn was not something that we would see with someone who was not exceptionally pure. It was thought that a unicorn would not appear before anyone but a virgin. So these two ladies must be virgins. And virginity was something highly, highly prized in the Christian era, in a way that in the pagan era it was a minor detail of life. Virginity in the Middle Ages was considered a sign of total grace, um, and total worthiness of a woman. Therefore, the unicorn exists with the virgin, and while the unicorn is the rarest of all creatures, perhaps we can surmise, since no one had really seen a unicorn, that it was thought still that virgins were relatively rare as well after a certain time in a woman's life. Who knows? In any case, Christianity brought ideas of a rule-giving God who was merciful. Jesus is nothing if not merciful. But old ways of thinking die hard. And the church in the Middle Ages often scapegoated individuals. They could burn people at the stake as witches, or groups for natural phenomena. Groups most often targeted were Jews. I could teach a whole class on the Crusades and how Jews were treated from about 1000 AD in Europe to the 20th century. And things that they might get blamed for would include bad harvest seasons or disease, for causing the wrath of God to fall on a community in any way. And they had no better way, even in the Christian era, of navigating the world other than conjecture.